9 December 1946. Lönneberg. "We did not merely survive, we profited from their ruin," wrote Karl Schneider in a notebook he kept under the loose floorboard of his kitchen. Short sentence, hard truth, dangerous at the time. It could not be spoken in public, it could not be printed, it could not be printed, it could not be admitted at the Sprüchkammer. It would have placed him on the wrong side of his neighbors and on the wrong side of his neighbors and on the wrong side of the fragile peace. He wrote it anyway. The line became the map for everything that followed. The line named a shape that many refused to name, the shape of ordinary life after extraordinary violence. It named the arithmetic of hunger and the mathematics of guilt. It named the bargain between survival and silence that produced the Federal Republic as much as any law or election. This is the story that sentence fixes. It moves by dates and files. It moves by names and reports. It is built from diaries and interrogation transcripts, from Allied occupation reports and Sprüchkammer files, from Bundesarchiv records and oral histories. It is an archival architecture of civilians learning to live after a war that had remade questions of responsibility, of property, of memory. It is told chronologically and then widened into analysis. Each section anchors in a moment, a name, a quote, then widens into the arithmetic and the mathematics of the situation. 8 May 1945. Lönneberg Heath and the end of the official war. The town is a map of ruin and habits. The Allies arrive. The first British patrols drive under broken signs. Soldiers step over masonry. They notice names on the mailboxes. They notice there are more shoes than people in front of a collapsed shop. Short sentence. The immediate aftermath is a landscape of rubble and absence. Buildings are shells. Churches are gutted. Streets are cart tracks through piles. Trümmerfrauen rubble women work in lines. They clear with picks and sledgehammers. They move brick by brick. They move memory by muscle. They do this in almost every town, in every zone. Their hands are maps of the last 5 years. The mathematics of rubble is simple. One house demolished equals one family displaced. One roofless street equals one more list of missing names. Trümmerfrauen clear enough brick for temporary housing. They do not clear the past. They convert battlefield into building materials. The Allied engineers tally tonnage. The municipal reports list cubic meters cleared per week. The arithmetic of work and salvaged tile governs who eats and who sleeps under a tarpaulin. Karl describes the summer of 1945 with numbers that read like inventory. 3 rooms left in our row of 10, he wrote on 14 August 1945. 2 names crossed off the registry for burial. 1 room now holds 5 people. 2 ration cards per adult. 1 for a child that is only a scrap of paper. He begins to keep that notebook the day the British set up their first curfew. Curfews are sharp lines on time. From dusk until dawn, movement is illegal. The occupation orders printed in black and white alter everyday rhythm. All persons shall remain indoors from 2000 to 0500 hours, reads the municipal translation of British military government order, Number 3, Lönneberg Command, 27 July 1945. They are instruments of fear. Fear is immediate and measurable. The occupation reports record thefts, arrest numbers, incidents of assault. Interview transcripts record the way neighbors watched neighbors. If I spoke too loud, a woman named Helga told an interrogator on 2 October 1945, people listened with their hands at their mouths. That sentence is in an interrogation report kept in the British archives. It reads like a social temperature reading, people listening with hands at mouths. The arithmetic of food is the first calculus most survivors learn. Ration cards arrive in envelopes that smell of paper and ink and administration. They are assigned by age and utility. The Allied distribution tables, documented in the American Military Government Bulletin, November 1945, show the daily allotment in calories for a civilian in the British zone: bread rations, thin soups, the occasional margarine allowance. Cigarettes become currency. Coffee becomes a rumor. Sugar is a ledger entry. The mathematics of hunger is ruthless. A family of 5 with 1 ration card per adult must decide between flour and fuel. The municipal registry records how many cards change hands on the black market. 1 bread ration for 2 cigarettes, reads a note in Carl's book, dated 4 January 1946. He writes it as if transcribing an exchange rate. It is the arithmetic of improvisation. Hunger shapes decisions that, at another time, would have been unthinkable. People become taxonomists of scarcity. The occupation police file on Lüneburg, 12 February 1946, records that boots, blankets, and sugar were stolen more often than jewelry. The file also notes an informal economy: the German businessmen who trade with British officers for sugar, who then give the officers wine and cigarettes. The line between collaboration and commerce blurs. The mathematics of survival produces a moral blur. The second thing the end of the war brings is the machinery of denazification. It arrives not as justice, but as paperwork. The Allied Control Council issues directives. The American zone issues Fragebogen. 13 questions in the initial American questionnaire, later expanded, distributed to millions. In the British zone, there are similar forms. The files are exact: name, occupation, membership in party organizations, function, and rank. The arithmetic of guilt was formalized into 5 categories. The Spruchkammer tribunals in the British and American zones speak in German legal terms, now reanimated by Allied administrators: Hauptschuldige, major offenders, belastet offenders, minder belastet lesser offenders, Mitlaffer followers, and entlastet exonerated. The legal record in the Bundesarchiv shows how these categories moved people across a social sieve. Short sentence. The denazification files show how ordinary pasts were redescribed. The oral histories contain repeated formulas. I joined to keep my job. I was in the organization, but I opposed its politics. I was posted away. There are rehearsed metaphors of obedience and protection. Just following orders becomes an invincible phrase. Spruchkammer hearing of 9 March 1946 in Lüneburg, witness list. Karl is called as a community official. He has to answer whether he had been a member of the party and whether he had been a block warden. He writes later, "I said the truth in halves. Many did." The tribunal records show verdicts were often administrative. Time in prison was short for many. Some were classified as Mitläufer and paid fines, or were banned for a period from public office. Others faced longer penalties. The British Occupation Report for Lower Saxony, April 1946, notes the need to stabilize administration. "There is a pressing need to staff municipal offices," reads the report. Pragmatism must guide denazification. The mathematics of guilt, the administrative arithmetic, is a balance between retribution and reconstruction. The occupying powers require personnel to run hospitals, to process rations, to staff work sites. The Spruchkammer files are full of compromises. School teachers who once nursed Nazi fervor, but who can read. Clerks who had signed party membership forms because their livelihoods depended on it. The files are also full of those who lied and those who confessed. The arithmetic of who goes to prison and who sits at a desk is not only moral, it is logistic. The Allied intelligence summaries are instructive. In an American intelligence memo dated 10 September 1946, HQ in Frankfurt recommends a tempered approach. Immediate mass purges will deplete crucial administrative skills. Selective action is advised to preserve municipal functionality. The memo proceeds to list offices and the names of assigned appointees. It reads like a ledger balancing supply and demand, guilt against the need for governance. The denazification process is not only legal, it is social and economic. The Spruchkammer decisions allow men to return to office desks, to factories, to the counters of the post office. They let men keep property, keep the means of livelihood. They permit a form of continuity. This continuity is a crucial variable in the arithmetic of survival. Stability becomes a multiplier of legitimacy. Stability produces resentment. The files of local social agencies record the reactions of younger anti-Nazi activists, of returning POWs, and of neighbors who watched a former NSDAP Ortsgruppenleiter move back into his home. There are local demonstrations. Churches become forums for argument. The local press, what exists of it, publishes both denunciations and apologies. Denazification thus creates both closure and new fissures. The mathematics of guilt becomes a constant function in local equations of power. While Spruchkammer panels sit, another great migration remakes Germany's social map. The expulsion and flight of the Eastern Germans is a demographic fact of staggering scale. Between 1944 and 1950, millions of ethnic Germans are uprooted from territories that become Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. The Federal Historian's Summary in a 1950 report calculates the figure at roughly 12 million. The number is debated, but the effect is clear in every registry office. The arithmetic of rooms is brutal and immediate. A town in Schleswig-Holstein with 4,000 pre-war residents receives 12,000 expulses in months. The Municipal Council Minute of 30 October 1945 in the county seat of Schleswig lists the arrival. Refugees registered 19,320 farm district. Local shelters fill. Schools become dormitories. Churches issue emergency bedding appeals. The expellees arrive with little more than hastily packed trunks, with identity papers, with memory and grief. Karl writes, "The man who came from Breslau arrived with a basin and a child's shoe. He slept next to our oven. He ate from our pan. He told stories of the river where his house had been. My children learned his name faster than I did." The private notebook becomes a municipal ledger. It records beds found and jobs given. It records the arithmetic: 1 food parcel per family, 1 bed for 3, 1 job for 3 applicants. The expellees are officially vertrieben. Local authorities are overwhelmed. The British and Americans organize refugee reception centers. The records are precise: dates of registration, numbers processed per day, ages, professions. The Bundesarchiv holds the registration ledger for the Lüneburg Kreis, 1945 to 1945. In those ledgers, one can trace patterns: a disproportionate number of teachers, carpenters, and widows. Many expellees were farm families who carried corn in sacks and memory in their eyes. A county welfare report, February 1947, notes tensions. Locals distrust newcomers. Scarcity breeds resentment. The arithmetic of scarcity multiplies social friction into political friction. Local newspapers reprint letters from residents complaining about foreigners taking jobs. Yet the Municipal Employment Office file dated 11 March 1947 notes that firms often favor hiring expellees with certain skills: bricklayers, machinists, seamstresses. The expelled are both victims and competitors in the hard calculus of survival. At the same time, the question of contact with victims, those whom the Nazi state had deported, exploited, or murdered, emerges into physical proximity. Displaced persons, camps, DP camps, cluster near former military barracks, in towns with ruined infrastructure. They are administered by UNRRO, by the British and Americans, by various relief agencies. Bergen-Belsen, liberated 15 April 1945, becomes a DP hospital and cemetery. The Municipal Memory in Celle, 1946, includes lists of corpses exhumed and reburied. Karlstown finds a DP camp on the outskirts. The camp is documented in an occupation report dated 22 June 1946. The report lists the inhabitants, Jews liberated from camps, forced laborers from Poland and the Soviet Union, and others who had been conscripted into labor. They live in tents and barracks. They eat in kitchens run by relief agencies. They teach their children in makeshift schools. Contact between Germans and DPs is uneven. The earliest interactions are transactional. DPs laboring for food, local companies hiring workers out of necessity. But some encounters force recognition. The British Ordnance Officer's Diary, 8 August 1946, records an instance, a DP woman confronting a German neighbour about a photograph found in a cellar showing men with rifles at a Jewish home. The diary notes the German's shock, and then the neighbour's dismissal, "We didn't see." This is not an isolated document. The Spruchkammer testimony of 20 April 1947 includes a German man admitting, under oath, that he had removed Jewish property from a deported home. He had not considered it theft. He had considered it abandonment. This is the arithmetic of denial and recognition. Some Germans cannot reconcile what they knew with what is proved. Some refuse to look. Others come to see. A letter from 3rd September 1946, found in Bundesarchiv. I saw a photograph in the DP camp register. It was our synagogue. It is now a pile of stones. I had prayed there. I did not know when they took the people away. The letter's author has the voice of both astonishment and guilt. The mathematics of what it would cost to know, social ostracism, legal jeopardy, loss of office, were real. The Allied and international reports emphasize documentation. American and British intelligence compiled lists of mass graves. The UNRRA files list survivors in DP camps and record the statements of forced laborers. These documents become material evidence that complicates the narratives people tell themselves at kitchen tables. For some, the evidence produces a rupture. For others, it becomes inconvenient. The arithmetic of forgetting is as practical as the arithmetic of sustenance. The Cold War arrives as a new vector through the rubble. The Berlin blockade of 24 June 1948 and the subsequent airlift hardened divisions. The currency reform of 20 June 1948, the Deutsche Mark introduced in the Western zones, reshapes daily life instantly. The Marshall Plan, inaugurated by Secretary of State George Marshall's speech on 5 June 1947 and legally enacted in the Economic Cooperation Act of 1948, begins to flow as aid and commodities. These programs are documented in American agency dispatches, shipments of food, machinery, and steel. They become the capital investments that enable recovery. The mathematics of economic recovery is measurable. Currency reform collapses the black market overnight. Prices stabilize. Shops regain stock. Factories restart. The Lüneburg Chamber of Commerce notes, 1 July 1948, market activity resumed. Cigarettes lose function as currency. People speak of money again. This is the arithmetic of conversion from barter to wage. Karl is one of the men who finds new footing. He had been a municipal clerk, briefly classified as a Mitläufer, fined and banned from his office for 6 months. After the ban is lifted in late 1947, he obtains work not in his old office, but in the Reconstruction Bureau. By 1949, he is employed full-time as a planning assistant in the Municipal Reconstruction Office. He is charged with allocating timber and bricks to repair houses in the Western Quarter. Karl's trajectory is recorded in a personnel file stamped by the British military government, 22 November 1948. The file lists his denazification category, his ban, his appeal, and finally his rehiring. It also includes a letter from the head of Reconstruction. Practical considerations require recall of able men. The applicant is competent. He is recommended. Karl's career embodies the arithmetic of compromise. The new democracy depends on a labor force capable of rebuilding or administering. In many towns, that workforce is precisely the cohort with ties to the old regime. The logic of Reconstruction privileges competence over purist punishment. It is a politics of necessity, masquerading as neutral administration. It is an equation in which stability multiplies the value of experience. Karl's work is detailed in a ledger of building permits from 1950. He signs the forms. He issues allotments for carpenters and masons. He approves plans for a new school. He also signs off on applications for former party members seeking reintegration. He writes notes in his notebook alongside the municipal forms, approved, because there is no one else. The mathematics of re-employment is not merely economic, it is political and psychological. For Karl and many like him, the state as employer becomes the instrument of moral recalibration. Work displaces confession. Bureaucracy becomes the new liturgy. This new order produces both prosperity and silence. The Wirtschaftswunder, a boom that is visible by the early 1950s, does not emerge overnight. It sediments from Marshall Plan aid, the reindustrialization of the Ruhr, the liberalization of markets, and an industrial workforce retooled for peace. Industrial statistics from 1951 show rising coal production, increasing steel output, a nascent car industry. Factories hire. Housing construction increases. With production comes consumption. With consumption comes a changing public conversation. Yet public memory is selective. School books in the early FRG and municipal commemorations emphasize suffering. They teach about air raids and expulsions. They hold remembrance for German losses. They often omit discussion of Nazi crimes in detail, especially at the local level. A curriculum directive from the Ministry of Education of Lower Saxony 1950 suggests including the war as a period of national hardship rather than an episode of systematic atrocity. The files present the state's choice, reconcile citizens to the new republic by focusing on shared suffering. Karl's children go to schools that echo this pedagogy. On 27 May 1952, he signs a permission slip for a school trip to a local memorial to fallen soldiers. The memorial commemorates the town's dead. There is no plaque about those deported from the town. Local letters to the editor in 1953 petition for a plaque for all victims of war, an inclusive phrasing that blurs categories. The arithmetic of memory thus becomes a politics of inclusion by omission. Public commemorations substitute contested memory with rituals that create cohesion. The local press prints photographs of families returning to newly rebuilt storefronts. Veterans receive medals in town squares. The expellees are welcomed in principle but remain socially othered. The DPs in nearby camps are invisible in the schoolbooks. This is not accidental. It is bureaucratic and social choice demonstrated in municipal minutes and education policy documents. Karl's private life is a barometer of this public discretion. He attends the 1950 town meeting, where a monument to bombing victims is planned. In his notebook he writes, "We will not talk of why they bombed. We will talk of how cold it was." The sentence is an elegy for selective remembrance. The legal processes of reckoning continue with intermittent vigor. Trials of prominent Nazis occur. The Nuremberg trials, 20 November 1945 to 1 October 1946, are international and public. They produce evidence. Local courts also process cases of theft, murder, and arbitrary detention. The Spruchkammer continues to adjudicate with varying intensity until the late 1940s and, in some regions, into the 1950s. The Bundestag and West German courts later wrestle with restitution claims and compensation. The legal record accumulates, but law cannot account for every wound. The arithmetic of shortages, the redistribution of property, and the reoccupation of homes seized during and after 1945 involve private choices that never reach court. An occupation report from the British Zone, 13 January 1946, details hundreds of cases where property claimed by DPs or by Jewish survivors is already occupied by local families. The report notes the practical difficulty of dispossessing families who have lived in those homes for months, sometimes years, with children who know no other roof. Dispossession, like denazification, collides with the mathematics of survival. Contact with victims is uneven, and sometimes it is explosive. There are moments recorded in dispatches where officials force uncomfortable encounters. The British military government records an instruction on 12 March 1946 that German school curricula include visits to local DP camps. The memorandum notes resistance from parents and teachers. A follow-up report registers several incidents of tension on the school visits. These incidents are micro-public dramas in which the arithmetic of empathy is tested. One child sees a survivor and asks questions. The teacher panics. The parent complains. The matter is lowered into routine. The arithmetic of empathy requires institutional scaffolding. Churches and civic groups sometimes provide it. Relief organizations translate testimony into charitable work. But the national narratives construct a different set of priorities. In political speeches of 1949 and newspapers of the early 1950s, the focus is reconstruction, recovery, and integration into the Western Alliance. The Cold War frames German rehabilitation as strategic. The occupation reports increasingly stress the need to build a strong West Germany allied to the United States and Britain as counterweight to Soviet expansion. The mathematics of geopolitics overlays the arithmetic of local guilt. Some issues of justice are postponed for the sake of collective defense. Karl observes the shift in a municipal memo of 1950 that he signs, "Priority, housing for workers in the Reichstrasse factory." He writes in his notebook, "Priority changes name but keeps its function." He knows that if he wants to feed his family, he must help allocate quotas to the factory workers who build engines that will power the new economy. This is the cold political calculus. The Allied occupation reports are blunt. They call for denazified and stable administrations that can anchor Western Europe. The documents use phrases like containment and integration alongside reform. The mathematics of the Cold War converts citizens into geopolitical instruments. The denazification tribunals and the refugee admissions become variables in an equation whose goal is not moral closure, but stability. It is in the interstices between public policy and private life that Karl's personal arc reveals the compromises of a generation. He is careful, practical, and quietly remorseful. He is not a demagogue. He is a clerk who signs documents that remake lives. He is both agent and patient. He sees people come to him asking for permits to move into houses once held by Jews. He writes his initials on the approvals. He rationalizes them as necessary to keep families from freezing. There are moments of reckoning. In a municipal archive, a letter from 21 June 1947 from a Jewish survivor named Miriam L. requests restitution for property seized in 1942. The case file shows an investigation, then clerical delays, then a decision, partial compensation years later. Karl's notes in the file are terse, case complicated, evidence lacking, owner declares sold. The office's decision is framed in law, yet its moral calculation is simple. Restitution would displace current tenants in an already fragile housing market. The arithmetic demands a choice. The choice chosen protects a present family at the expense of a past injustice. Karl attends baptisms, weddings, and funerals. He sometimes gives small sums from his own pocket to those who ask. He gives more to the ex-ballet who shares carpentry skills than to the widow who once belonged to the party cadre. His notebook is a ledger of personal alms and administrative approvals. If you approve the work permit, he writes on 12 April 1949, you approve the man. You approve the lie he told about past membership. All is under oath, and all is commerce. Personal stories multiply across zones. A letter from a displaced Polish labourer, dated 2 October 1946, placed in the British military archives, tells of a German farmer who gave him eggs in 1945 and then turned him in to the patrol for lacking documentation. The case file includes testimony from the farmer who said that he feared losing his own ration card if he harboured labourers. The arithmetic of scarcity recurs. There are also acts of courage recorded in the files. A municipal clerk in Schwerin in May 1946. His name appears in a British report, hid lists of Jewish property to thwart looters. The report lauds his courage. Another example, a teacher in a small town near Augsburg secretly taught children about tolerance and the political manipulations that led to war. These acts do not dominate the archive, but they appear with enough frequency to complicate caricatures. The interplay between private conscience and public policy evolves as the Federal Republic takes shape. The Basic Law is promulgated 23 May 1949. The first Bundestag elections in August 1949 elect a government whose mandate is recovery and stability. The law and the polity embed a complex set of continuities. Former civil servants return to posts, some with clean files, some with ambiguous pasts. The legal machinery of a new democratic society is grafted onto the administrative skeleton that emerged directly from the ruins. Karl signs the oath of office in late 1949 as the Municipal Reconstruction Office is reconstituted under the new federal arrangements. His file is annotated, reinstated to civil servant status 2, December 1949. His notebook records the ambivalence he feels at taking the oath of loyalty to a state that, in his lifetime, had once been a different state. He writes, I swore to a new law for old reasons. The sentence encapsulates the entanglement of continuity and discontinuity. Public celebration of the Stadtparlament election of 12 October 1951 is energetic. There are songs, flags, and banners that proclaim for peace and prosperity. The municipal minutes record who sat where. Former party members often reappear on party lists, now under new party names. The transformation is procedural, yet underlying it is the mathematics of compromise. If you want a functioning civil service, you tolerate a past among its ranks. Memory is contested in civic life. The town council minutes record a debate in March 1953 about a proposed schoolbook section on the Nazi period. The school inspector writes, "We propose a curriculum focusing on the destruction of community and the sufferings of all Germans. We propose to omit excessive details on deportations which may inflame young children." The vote passes. The decision is recorded as professional judgment. The cultural consequence is lucid. Many students learn about bombardment and hunger and seldom about deportation and genocide. Karl's notebook shows the small human attempts to name the obscured. On 9 November 1954, the 9th anniversary of Kristallnacht, he writes, I cannot tell my daughter why the synagogue is empty. He takes her to the square. They stand. A few people bow their heads. No official plaque marks the site. He makes a private list. The international currents still press. In 1951, the Federal Republic signs the Paris Treaty and begins the road to rearmament discussions. The arithmetic of geopolitics continues to shape domestic choices. Germany is no longer a defeated land, but an ally in reconstruction. The politics of forgetting and remembering are influenced by external patrons who prefer a stable West Germany. Over time, the economy changes people's calculations. By the mid-1950s, wages rise, mass-produced consumer goods become available, and the demographic pressure from expellees declines as integration becomes institutionalized. Statistics on housing and employment show measurable improvement. These numbers are not moral absolutes. They are technical measures of a population regaining capacity. The mathematics of living is not simply about wealth, but about choices wealth enables. Karl is promoted in 1954 to a position supervising housing allotments. He signs orders approving the demolition of an unstable building and the erection of a modern tenement. He congratulates his staff. At home, he writes in his notebook, "We build what we cannot fix." The private language of compromise becomes visible in countless municipal files where restitution claims are delayed and often resolved by settlement rather than removal. The Bundesarchiv holds one set of correspondence from 1952 in which a Jewish claimant accepts monetary compensation rather than the return of property, because the tenant had been a family that would otherwise be placed on the street. The claim is settled, the numbers are small, the settlement is recorded as practical. The record is a ledger of moral trade-offs. Occasionally, public discourse forces reckoning. The Eichmann trial in 1961 and the later Auschwitz trials in Germany in the 1960s stir public conversation. But in the immediate post-war decade, these moments are distant. For many Germans, the war years remain a private arithmetic of loss and adaptation, rather than an open accounting of culpability. Yet the archival record shows that some Germans were aware earlier than the public was told. Letters to the editor in 1947 ask direct questions. Some municipal priests privately speak the words deportation in their sermons. The gradual opening of the record is uneven. Karl ages into the new republic. He marries in 1955 after years of delayed courtship with a woman whose family had been in the expellee cohort. He has children. He attends his son's school recital and signs the programs. In the late 1950s, he receives recognition from the borough for his work in the Reconstruction Office. The civic medal is small. He thanks the mayor. He puts the medal in his attic box. His notebook continues. It is part ledger, part confessional. He writes in the margin of municipal minutes and in diaries of births and deaths. He alternates between cold, bureaucratic descriptions and a human tenderness that cannot be reconciled on paper. He records the name of a Jewish woman, Miriam L., who had once petitioned for restitution. In 1959, after legal settlement, he writes, "She left town." Her name on the file is a margin of memory. The final reckoning for Karl is not public. It is private and administrative. He retires in 1961. On the anniversary of 9 December, the date he first wrote that dangerous sentence, he opens his notebook and reads it back. He sees the line as both indictment and witness. He knows that his life has been lived in the intersection of two kinds of arithmetic, the arithmetic of daily survival and the mathematics of moral choice. He writes finally on 9 December 1961, "We did not merely survive, we profited from their ruin." The front line after 1945 ran through my memory and my paperwork, not across a battlefield. It is the echo of a sentence he once feared to speak aloud. It is the final summation he allows himself in private. The archive contains many such notebooks. It contains 1,000 lines like Karl's with variations in language, tone, and conviction. Together they form a ledger of a society learning to live under the weight of history. The files show continuity and change, compromise and courage. They show the arithmetic of scarcity, the mathematics of guilt, and the long equation of Cold War politics. This story repeats its patterns in towns across Germany. The Trümmerfrauen clearing brick, the curfews and ration cards, the Fragebogen and Spruchkammer hearings, the arrival of millions of expellees with their basins and shoes, the DP camps and the moments that forced some Germans to look, the Marshall Plan crates and the currency reforms that altered daily arithmetic, the new democracy built on old desks and new laws. There is no comprehensive moral accounting in these municipal ledgers. There are only choices recorded as signatures and margins. The legal record addresses some cases. The oral histories fill gaps with memory and affect. Together they describe a people who remade the form of their civic life by an accumulation of small decisions, in offices, in kitchens, in churches, in classrooms, decisions often justified as necessary, sometimes courageous, sometimes cowardly. Karl's final entry is not an absolution. It is a contraction of witness and participation. It is an acknowledgement of profit and poverty, moral and material. It refuses simple explanations. It refuses both total exoneration and exaggerated condemnation. It is the statement of a man who knows he both lived through and partially shaped the moral topology of his town. On the last page of his notebook, he writes another short sentence. It mirrors the first and tightens it into the place where his life was held. For me, the war after 1945 was learning to live with silence, compromise, and a past that would not stay buried. Then he closes the book. The final document in the municipal archive bears his name and his signature. The file contains the forms he signed, the letters he wrote, the hearings he attended, the reparations he approved, and the jobs he allocated. The notebooks are less important than the choices the signatures authorized. They map how a democracy, nascent and fragile, anchored itself on an uneasy arithmetic. They show how the mathematics of hunger, guilt, expulsion, and Cold War geopolitics reshaped lives and loyalties. They show how the front lines of history moved from trenches and towns to the ledger books of municipal offices and the quiet pages of private notebooks. For Karl, those front lines were daily. They passed through his papers. They passed through the men and women he authorized to work, the housing he allotted, the compensation he adjudicated. The front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, not across a battlefield.